Happy New Year to you. Welcome to the first Quocast of 2024. Hard to believe that I've been doing this nearly 5 years now. Wow, I've done so many things in that time and look forward to the next year and seeing what that brings. Now, 2023 was one of those years where there was a lot of things going on. We had the McVention in Glasgow on the fan side of things with tribute bands and other bits and pieces. There was the tour from Francis Rossi, the acoustic Tunes and Chat tour, where he did over 100 dates with Andy Brook. And there was obviously that release that came from that. There was the Rhino gigs, the promise of a new album. There was an EP that was released. So many things happened. John Coughlan's Quo reimagined. I mean, yeah. But at the end of the year, there was one tiny little piece of Quo to be had, and it was via a program that was broadcast right at the end of December, around the 29th, the 30th, around there, called The Kemps, All Gold, in which our very own Francis Rossi made an appearance. Now, I've seen a lot of comments about this mockumentary featuring Gary and Martin Kemp, most of them saying that they didn't find it funny or, didn't see the point of it, or it was just nonsense or pointless or whatever adjectives are used to describe this thing. But I wanted to take this moment as the first episode of the year to take a deep dive into it, because when we dive deeper, it kind of looks on the surface like just another cameo appearance from Francis Rossi. But when we dive deeper, it plays a much bigger role in the history of Quo, certainly in the last 15 years. Now, let me explain. So this program, The Kemps, All Gold, was a sequel to a 2020 mockumentary featuring the Kemp brothers I think it was called All True. Now, these specials have Rhys Thomas at the heart of them. And if you don't know who Rhys Thomas is, he also did something called the Brian Pern series featuring Simon Day. Now, this was a series of mockumentaries featuring a fictional rock star from a 70s rock band. He was based on Peter Gabriel, and he basically did a load of stuff. It was sending up the music industry and what it means for a 70s rocker to still be about in the modern age. And he had a manager in this series played by Michael Kitchen. And it was a very funny series. They did 2 or 3 series of this. And at the end of the second series, they did a Christmas special. And the Christmas special featured our very own Rick Parfitt playing himself. Although, if you look at the caption on the screen, it said Francis Rossi. But that's the whole joke of it. That was the whole thing. And this episode saw Brian trying to record a Christmas song, and Michael Kitchen's character is trying to find people, and it's explained to him what he wants, and Rick Parfitt walks in, and basically Brian explains what he wants to Rick, and Rick goes da 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 da. And if you haven't seen it, it's very funny. Because it's playing into that stereotype that Rick only knew how to do one thing. And you and I, as fans, know that that is not the case. He could do lots of different genres, different things. In fact, Quo did, and he himself did, in their 60-year career. But about that another day. How does that connect to this new thing that featured Francis Rossi in a cameo role? Well, basically, it's set in the same world because Michael Kitchen is also playing the same character in this new Kemp's thing, and the first one as well, I think, and he is Gary and Martin's manager. Now, to discuss this in a little bit more detail, I have invited my wife, Andrea, onto the podcast to talk about this because we really enjoyed it. We were looking forward to it anyway because it's just silly fun, right? The Kemp's thing is always silly fun when they get involved. And it's worth noting as well that slightly before the Kemp's thing, there was that Bros documentary. And I think that's how it really came about. They were kind of sending that up. And as we've got closer to this new one, it's become more and more Brian Pernish. And so enter Francis Rossi and enter my wife as well. What did you think of the mockumentary in general?
Specifically, the newest installment,
Yes.
The Kemp's All Gold, I loved it. I really enjoyed the first one they made, but I felt, as you've just said, I felt like this one was a lot more tied to the Brian Pern universe. And for me, that was like an extra hit. Like it had a higher laugh rate for me.
Because we watched that Brian Pern thing, and I remember us watching it, and you didn't know what half the references meant because you don't sort of follow that era of music too much, but you found it funny anyway because it was just funny because you think this is what rock acts of this era, this is what they go through. We hear about it, we, you know, even if we don't know specifics.
Exactly. I didn't have to know what each reference exactly was, you know, who that fictional character was referring to, for example, to know that it was funny. Just the whole vibe and, like you say, the things they were going through and some of the things they tried to do and all the ridiculous ideas they were having were just funny anyway.
And I must say, Gary and Martin Kemp, in my opinion, just exceptional. Well, they both are. They're both gold, if you pardon the pun, when it comes to this. They just play it so well, and they play into all the modern kind of things that acts try and do, launching their own ranges and trying to make a movie and coming up to all kinds of stumbling points, and whether that movie is faithful to the story or not, or, you know, and broken bands and all kinds of really interesting topics that are just sent up so beautifully. And the comedy is quite subtle in a way. It is quite subtle. And the way that Francis Rossi comes into it, if you haven't seen it, go and look at it on iPlayer and come back. But if you haven't seen it, so Francis Rossi basically ends up forming a supergroup with them. They want Harry Styles for a New Year's thing. And Martin basically promises that Francis Rossi can get on board, even though they've booked Harry Styles. So they have to cancel Harry Styles for Francis Rossi. Seems like a fair trade to me, but then I am biased, aren't I? So Francis comes in to this scene, and it's shot in sort of a, you know, well, it's a mockumentary. And he sat down like trying to piece all the pieces together, like naming it like Spandau Quo. And he's like, yeah, as long as Quo is in like big F off letters, essentially. And Francis looks like he's having the time of his life in this.
I would say so, yeah, because he, that isn't to say actually that there isn't quite a lot of believability in his acting, I guess, because he spends half the time playing it straight and the other half of the time when he's really not got a lot to do in the scene anymore or that kind of thing, you can see that little twinkle of laughter in his eye, like he's almost looking on like a member of the audience and enjoying what's going on, what the Kemps are doing.
And some of it feels very spontaneous.
Yes.
Very spontaneous. And a couple of, I won't go through it bit by bit, beat by beat, but some of the memorable things that stick out to me is him saying he hates the fans and he's not on a health kick and all the kind of things, which is funny considering over the last year he's done, over 100 dates, and he's done a meet and greet pretty much before every one. So he makes time for the fans before these gigs, and and that's kind of what it is with this kind of style, is they take something that perhaps you're known for, in Quo's case, having a hardened fan base, and just turning it on its head completely. And it's funny.
Exactly. It's that kind of making it polar opposite to the truth in a way. And that's what makes it so funny.
And then at other times, leading up to the stereotype of, Quo can only do one thing. Francis comes in with 2 ponytails to give to them. That's a particular highlight. I did see a lot of people say that was like their favorite bit, even non-fans. The favorite bit was him coming in going, you need a ponytail, here's my 2 that I've got, It's what it is. Even though he hasn't had a ponytail for like 16, 17 years, something like that, they're still doing it. I think because the wider public, that's kind of, what he's known for. He's the guy with the ponytail.
It is. And yet I think even if you don't know that, I think that's one of those examples where you don't even have to know the reference to realise that's funny. Because here's a guy without a ponytail going, you two have got to have one to match me. Isn't that ridiculous? And it's so funny. And you don't have to know Quo at all. You don't really have to know any of the inside knowledge. It's just that it's ridiculous on the surface of it, never mind everything that's going on underneath. And so it's that kind of really heightened absurdity, really.
Totally. We'll add in the waistcoat thing, obviously, and the garb, and the fact that by the end they're both looking like him. There is an observation in there that Francis wants the Spandau songs to sound like Status Quo, which is really interesting considering, again, he spent the last year with Andy Brook playing acoustic versions, i.e. different to what you would expect of his compositions, which again, as fans, makes it even funnier, in my opinion.
I think so, yeah. I think when you know that, it's like it's the reversal it brings that extra element of kind of humour to it.
It seemed as though a lot of it was very much improvised when it came to them playing. I mean, I loved that version of True that they did, where it was kind of done in that Quo style. And it just works, in my opinion. It's really weird. I'd love to know whether Francis chose some of the little deviations that they did, such as doing the whatever you want thing instead of Gary's ha 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 things that he does in that song, and then going into Burning Bridges as well. I'd love to know if he had any say in that whatsoever, whether that was as off the cuff as it seemed. It just seemed so random, and to me just absolutely just stole it completely.
Yeah, it really did. And it felt actually very kind of organic and spontaneous. There was a different mood to it than the scenes that were much more obviously, definitely scripted.
I mean, there was a moment where he laughed. It cut to him laughing. And I was like, I think I said to you, I don't think that was scripted. I think they were just bantering back and forth. And there it was, and they were like, let's just use that because it makes him seem almost obnoxious.
Yes, yeah, and it did definitely just feel like a genuine Francis laugh, to be honest.
Very much so, along with that sleeping scene. That was interesting. And him saying he needs to save his voice,
Yeah. Not going to sing until the day because he's got to save his voice. So it's kind of just injecting it with that little bit of obnoxious rock star, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And then going into it's Christmas time to go into December, which is really nice because, again, with that connection, that is a Rick Parfitt, Wayne Morris song. And so we're going from Francis to Rick, and thus we've gone full circle in a way because we're making this little reference to Rick, who's already, who's already been in this universe, who's already existed. He's already made an appearance, and Francis has done his bit, and, they've essentially been in the same thing.
Yeah, and I think that especially, that little touch of the Christmas song, I think did make it feel very complete, and it felt almost like a nice little nod to it. And I think that's something about this universe of mockumentaries is that it all ties together in a really pleasing way. As stupid as it is, as much as it's all just completely ridiculous, there's always like this little bit of heart underneath that somehow like lifts it from just this is stupid to like this really bigger thing somehow. Like, and it feels very real because of that, I think, because of those little bits of heart.
And you care about even the fictional characters. Like, you want to tune in and go, I've loved Martin and Gary Kemp for years because they were in Spandau Ballet and I love Spandau Ballet or whatever. And really, it's the fictional characters that they bring in that just kind of tie it together. I mean, we've talked in private at length about how great Michael Kitchen is. If you've ever seen the Brian Pern thing, seriously, he steals every scene that he's in. In some ways, I think that's been lessened. In this, it's kind of a different vibe because they're working with different actors. But it's the same character and the same thing. And yeah, he's just fantastic. And Francis has one last scene where he says he's off to the Hootenanny or something because the Kemps don't turn up, But I think if there was like a Rocks New Year's Eve, I think they might record it anyway. So the whole thing kind of falls flat. But I think if there was one of those things, Francis could probably do it by himself anyway. He'd just have to be prepared to sing a couple of cover songs, like they do on these things. But the whole mockumentary itself was really fun. Really fun. I look forward to watching it again. We've watched the Francis scenes a few times just to kind of see every little bit. And I understand why people don't get it or they think it's kind of silly. But it does meet into this entire universe of kind of Rhys Thomas mockumentaries. And the Brian Pern thing is very much recommended, especially if you're a Quo fan. Go and check out the Christmas episode with Rick in it because he plays it perfectly. It's so perfect the way that he does it, with the da-da-da-da-da-da. And he's like, well, that's really good for Quo. And Rick's like, well, you got the wrong bloke, really, haven't you? It's like, it's just so like cheeky and charming and just marvelous. And to me, this is what Francis has done in this new thing. He's continued that. And he's kept the Quo end up.
I think so, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, definitely so. But it rounds off a very interesting year in Francis Rossi and his career, because for years, he's always going to be that guy from Status Quo. But I do feel in the last year, he has really taken a step into the celebrity side of things. Now, I know back in the 80s and 90s, like Rick and Francis would get paired up on chat shows and stuff, and they go and do almost like a Morecambe and Wise thing. But in the last year, I think Francis has almost gone beyond that in other ways. I mean, he did the train thing with Pete Waterman, which was a very interesting insight. I'd love to know if he's actually built the track in his garage or wherever it was in that little building that he had. But before that, he was on Antiques Road Trip, which was most unexpected. That didn't seem like, in the past, aside from things like Rock Till You Drop or Bula Quo or anything like that, even those things, they've been tied to music. the things he's been doing in the last year, aside from the tour, have been tied more to him as a personality. And I think that is really interesting. I mean, he was, I can't believe I'm going to use this word, but he was adorable in that Antiques road trip because you found out other things. I know people will be hoping he talks about the Glasgow Apollo and he talks about the music side of it. But I loved it when he was like, oh, my uncle had one of these, and you see just a little bit more of him.
It's the human side, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I've really enjoyed seeing those things this year too, where it's more about his personality and the fact that he can be quite a likable presence in a program, and he can bring, I guess, in a lot of cases, like a certain generation's point of view. And, he's a certain age, but he's also a certain age in the music industry. And so it's like bringing all of that to it, isn't it? And it's quite interesting.
Definitely. I mean, years ago, Rick was going to be on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, from what I hear. I'm not sure Francis would quite go that far. I think he'd maybe give that a miss, but I can see him going on other shows. I mean, it's only a matter of time before he goes on a quiz show of some kind.
True. I mean, he did taste Greg's.
He did, yes. I forgot about that. He did do that, didn't he? Yeah. Where he was just at the end of someone who'd never had Greg's before. I'm not sure I've had Greg's before either, but that is exactly what I mean. He's just been in these programs as himself. He hasn't gone on there to play a number or to talk about whatever gig he was doing. It's not the usual round of This Morning, Good Morning Britain, Loose Women. It was outside of the area. And I think that probably ties into the tunes and chat thing, where you've got the tunes. Sure, he's playing tunes acoustically with Andy Brooke, but he's also got the chat. And that requires selling yourself as a personality in addition to being a musician. But I think in terms of like celebrity culture, it's just been really interesting seeing that very gradual shift over the last year and seeing the consistency of the types of things that he's doing. Because actually Antiques Road Trip and the Trains thing with Pete Waterman are a very similar kind of program in their tone.
They are, yeah. And like you say, it was like a lead on, I mean, some of the things that he commented on and saw when he was on Antiques Road Trip, yeah, it was like a direct progression, wasn't it? And then the interest that he took in all the things that Pete took him to see and everything was just really endearing.
Yeah, I think so. And I look forward to seeing what happens in the next year. I mean, obviously, Quo are going back out on tour, which we shall talk about on the podcast, certainly, and hopefully interview some people who go to the gigs. He's got another Tunes and Chat tour, from what I understand, in the next year or so. Again, we'll cover all of these things, but I just wanted to take this first one of the year to kind of talk about how it's been very different in 2023. And I always look forward to seeing him on shows anyway. But seeing him on even more shows will be great, outside of the norm, obviously, outside of that promotional trail. All depends, doesn't it? All depends. Yeah, so that was Francis Rossi in 2023. Can't wait to see what is in the year ahead. I think the next episode that I'm doing is about the milestones of this year, 2024. So album milestones in the 5 and 10 regions. So we've got things like Quo this year, that 50th anniversary of Quo, spare parts, lots of other things besides whatever you want. Something called a Quo stick, which we shall cover at some point. But yeah, what do you make of the Kemps All Gold and of any of the Francis Rossi appearances on television in the last year? Do let me know in the comments below. Thank you, Andrea, for being a guest today.
Thank you for having me.